The United Nations puts the number of people killed in Darfur at about 300,000, with nearly 3 million driven from their homes. Other organizations put those numbers much higher. We really don't know, but we do know that for the past 6 years, the people of Darfur, a region in Western Sudan, have been subjected to genocide. Hello, and welcome to Mideast Journal, where we focus on the topics and trends that shape the Middle East. I'm Geerges. In today's program, we focus on the genocide in Darfur and what can and should be done about it. Joining me are representatives of two advocacy groups based in Washington, D.C. Mark Hannes is the president of the Genocide Intervention Network, and Gerald Lamel, he is executive director of Africa Action. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Mark, I use the term genocide in the introduction, but only the United States has actually labeled what's happening in Darfur as genocide, not even the United Nations.
Well, you know, the term genocide has a specific legal definition, and it was defined as the intent to destroy a group of people in whole or in parts, and it was the first UN convention. There hasn't been a genocide since that convention was passed where a government has called it a genocide until the U.S. There was a commission of inquiry, and that commission said it wasn't genocide, but the International Criminal Court, which came out of the UN, the prosecutor submitted a request for indicting the president of Sudan on the crime of genocide. Thus far, the ICC has not approved that indictment, but they said it could be added on later. So the jury's still out on whether
So right now, as far as the United Nations calling it genocide, but even other Western countries have not stepped up to that, only the United States.
Well, the European Union did call its acts tantamount to genocide, so they didn't use the official G word.
So we're kind of skating on the outskirts
right.
of genocide. Gerald, in early March, the International Criminal Court did issue an arrest warrant for Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir, first time for that to be against a sitting head of state. The crimes were war crimes and crimes against humanity. What did they determine was his actual role in these events in Darfur?
Well, they said he was the mastermind behind it. He was the one who actually had the idea and put the forces in place for the Janjaweed to commit the atrocities. So they have him directly responsible.
Now, the ICC does not have a police force.
No.
They can't go out and actually arrest him. So what does this really mean? What does this warrant mean?
Well, for all intents and purposes, it's really an international isolation because the ICC does not have the authority. And what it hopefully will do is limit Bashir's influence and access outside of Sudan and Africa. But the ICC is clearly not strong enough to hold him accountable, at least at this point in time.
And clearly, his influence hasn't been limited because he started traveling. He was accepted to other countries, Egypt, Eritrea, others. He even attended the Arab League Summit in Qatar. He got the red carpet treatment, Mark. What was that about?
Yeah, it was President Bashir thumbing his nose at the International Criminal Courts. But it is important to note that the member states of the International Criminal Court do have a responsibility to arrest and detain him. So if you note, he was very strategic at which countries he's been visiting because he is concerned about visiting countries that are members of the ICC and being arrested and handed over. So there is some limitations on where he can travel. But
the Arab League pretty much came out publicly and said, we don't agree with this, we are accepting him. I can't understand why they would do that. And it wasn't just the Arab League, also the Organization of Islamic Conference, the OIC, condemned the International Criminal Court. So what's going on here? Because a lot of the people dying in Darfur are Muslims, but they're black Muslims, they're not Arab Muslims. Is this racism?
Well, it could well be. You know, one of the things, a lot of these regional institutions are often committees of dictators. They're committees of heads of state who look to protect one another. And they're loath to hold each other accountable because they, as they often say, they may end up in the same situation themselves. So they're going to thumb their nose. I think they do bring up some legitimate points in that it seems that the ICC has focused a great deal on African leadership as opposed to others. And at what point do we begin to look at atrocities being committed by other leaders across the globe? But for my purposes and for purposes of those of us at Africa Action who care about African people, there has to be some entity that holds these governments accountable. If the regional entities within Africa can't do it, then somebody else has to.
Mark, the Bashir, in response to this arrest, expelled 13 international aid organizations that were helping the people displaced in Darfur. What are you estimating the impact of that is?
The impact is extremely concerning. There are people who claim that upwards of 1 million people are left without food, water, and medical supplies. So the fear is that the death toll is going to skyrocket, where people are going to die out of starvation, out of water, and then a huge public health crisis, malaria, meningitis, diarrhea, because of this consequence. But the interesting thing is, when you look back at it, Sudan was able to be pressured into signing a peace agreement between the North and the South.
Ending that very long civil war.
Exactly, and it was the U.S. government under President Bush, without deploying one U.S. Marine, using economic and diplomatic carrots and sticks, that was able to pressure Sudan, the government of Sudan, and the People's Liberation Army and movement in the south of Sudan to bring about that peace agreement. So we're saying the playbook has been written. We need to run that same playbook for all of Sudan. And that came about because of domestic political pressure.
But before we talk about the pressure, why would Bashir do this? Why would he expel these aid organizations that were obviously doing very good work? Was this a situation where he's saying, you know what, you guys mess with me, I'm going to mess with you, and I'm going to make things even worse for the people already suffering? He's
certainly testing the limits of what the international community is going to do in response to him defying the International Criminal Court's indictment. So he's definitely testing and seeing what the response is, which is why our response needs to be extremely aggressive in saying you can't get away with expelling these aid organizations. You have to let them back in, you've got to stop committing genocide, and you've got to ensure you're more responsible government for all of Sudan. We can't do it piecemeal.
Gerald, let's take a step back and explain for us briefly, if you could, how this conflict, this genocide, came about for Darfur.
Well, there are a variety of theories as to how the actual origins of it, whether it's the pursuit of oil, whether it was the mobilization of the Darfur region against Bashir as a political entity, or whether he just simply wanted to do this for his own political reasons. The fact of the matter is he invested a great deal in the disruption and destabilization of the Darfur region by using a group of Arab nomads who traditionally had come down to bring in their herds and sheep and goats and so on and so forth down to the Darfur region to feed. He began to organize them and arm them and help them to encourage them to commit atrocities and violations against the Darfur people.